Hi, my name's Phil Gardner and welcome to Fun with Boxes. Well, today I'm taking a look at a rather wonderful and extremely colourful game. My goodness, does this game pop on the table or what? Well, what could this game be, I hear you ask? It is a fairly new game from Alley Cat Games, and the game is called Aborea. Look at that fantastic cover. Look at the artwork. Absolutely unbelievable. Really fantastic artwork there. And the beautiful artwork is not just on the cover of the box. Oh no, you will find a rather splendid looking game board to play on. However, the first time you see it, it may well take your breath away because it is rather bright and rather busy looking. But once you start playing the game, you realise just how well laid out and interesting this game board really is. And here is the board for you to take a look at now. And I'm sure you will agree, wow, it is chock full of colour and seems to have so many things on it to do that seems very confusing. But in actual fact, it's not so confusing at all. And once you start playing, you really get into the theme of the game. It really is rather clever. Aborea is a game for 1 to 5 players. It will take you around 90 minutes to 120 minutes. And Arborea is designed by Dani Garcia with artwork by Nico and Javier. Absolutely wonderful artwork. And what a very interesting and very clever game design this is. Well, we were rather lucky enough to be given this game by Alley Cat Games at the UK Games Expo this year for us to take a look at on the channel. And I'm really glad that they did give us this game because it has been an absolute delight. And what is Arborea? Well, once in a millennia, Aborea begins anew, and as a guiding spirit, you'll oversee the growth of this realm into a new and prosperous ecosystem. Guide your workers on pilgrimages to gather precious resources and attract exotic creatures. The further your workers travel, the greater the blessings they'll receive. Use these resources to build and overlay land cards, crafting your own unique ecosystem for the creatures that you collect. So, before we have a look at how to set up the game and how the game plays, let's take a Fun with Boxes look at what you get in the Kickstarter version of Aborea. Okay, let's take a look at how we set up a game of Aborea. First, place the main board into the center of the table. Next, take the pilgrimage track tiles and randomly place them onto the 4 tracks onto the board. So I've just got part of the board here just to show you as an example. So if I just take 2 here and 2 here, and when placing them, always place the track that's got blank onto this space here, making sure that you've got these season icons on the right hand side of the board. So this would then go here, this would go here, and then this would go here. You will have 5 starting ecosystem cards, which are double-sided like this. Keep them to one side for now. Then sort the remaining ecosystem cards by their colours, and you will see that they have ecosystems on one side, and then they have their costs to activate them at the bottom and benefits at the top. So just separate them into the 4 different colours, give them a good shuffle, and then place these at the top of the board in this following order. Next we shuffle up the bonus tiles and place one random bonus tile on the top space of each column of the borderlands. So we would mix these up and then pop one onto the top spaces like so. Next we take all the creatures and place them at the top of the board. Next we take the biome tiles and place both pieces of each biome tile on the matching 0 spot on the biome reserve. And as you gain biome points, you will move the topmost biome up one space. So if I gained 2 of these, I would move that up to that space. Then during the game you'll be able to spend these points, or if you don't spend them, then what you can do is claim the points underneath. For every point you cross, you gain those points. So we gain 3 and 3 to gain 6 points. And next we randomly place the season tiles, one at random, at the top of each season stack. And then finally for the main board you set up the sun tracker based on the number of players. So if I was playing a 2-player game, I would place that there, and then you take 2 remaining sun trackers and place them here, or indeed you could even place them there. And this is a reminder that as the sun tracker progresses, as soon as it hits this spot, you will have 2 turns left to play, and then the game is over. And that's the main board setup. And now we set up the player boards. And each player takes a player board, player aid, and all components of their colour. First we place 8 cubes. Then place 2 elder figures into your supply. Also place 1 young villager into your supply. Then place 2 young villagers into their reserve and 3 veteran villagers into their reserve. And then each player would receive one of the starting ecosystem cards at random, and place this beside your board for the time being. Then each player takes 1 red biome card from the top of the board and places it onto one of the 3 slots on their player board. These cards show the cost to activate them at the bottom and the reward that you get at the top, and once you have paid for these you will be able to flip them over and add them to your ecosystem cards. When setting up for a 2-player game, 1 veteran is placed in your supply rather than the young villagers. So for 2 players this would be the setup. Now that your player boards are set up, you would randomly determine a first player, and then you place spirit trackers, starting with the first player, who would put their tracker onto the 0 space. Then the next player would put theirs onto the 2 space, as indicated by these numbers here, and so on. So the 3rd player would go on to 4, the 4th player onto 6, and the 5th player onto 8. Each player would put a cube at the bottom of each of the season tracks, and then each player places their RP counters to count their victory points. The final part of setup is performed in reverse turn order, so starting with the last player. Each player takes 1 villager from their supply and places it onto a pilgrimage track. This icon here indicates where the villager starts. And as soon as you place the villager, you then slide the track 1 space forwards. Then the next player gets to place. For example, I could place here, and again slide the track forward. You are allowed to place your villager onto a track that already contains an opponent's villager. So for example, rather than place that there, you could place it here. And during setup you ignore these season icons on the track. So you would place that there and again slide the track 1 space. One thing to note during setup is that villagers are allowed to step off the track once the track has moved. So if I reset this up as an example, so what we could do here is the first player places there, slides along, and then could jump off onto the trail. Then the next player places and they move along, and they could stay there, or they too could jump off. And in this example, this villager could go and start on this trail, or they could join this worker on this trail. And that's all you need to know for setup. Rather than give you a detailed how to play segment, instead I will go through what you do on a turn and cover the various game mechanics that you will activate to score the points you will need to win the game. And on your turn you perform 4 quite straightforward steps, and you can find these detailed on the back of the rulebook, which has this wonderful quick reference page. So if we go through these steps in order, on step 1 you either place a villager from your supply onto one of the 4 tracks, or instead you advance one of the tracks, and you may perform either of these actions again by spending spirit points. And whenever a track moves, any villagers on them may step off onto the beginning of a path. If you place your villager on a season icon, advance 1 step up that season's track. And then on to step 2, and this is where you may activate up to 2 villagers that are already standing at the beginning of a path. And you will simply move your villager along the path and activate each icon that you pass. When the villager gets to the end of the path, it is returned to your player board, and the large villagers return to your supply, and the small villagers return to their reserves. And step 2 is the main action you take in the game, and this is what will drive your game forward depending on what path you have chosen. So let's take a look at what some of these icons do in the game. These icons will attract creatures to the board, and they will also advance the sun track 1 space. The relevant creature is placed on this track on the topmost spot, providing you with a listed benefit underneath. If there is a bonus tile here, you activate the tile and then remove it from the game. This is a one-time bonus. This is the icon that will allow you to take one of the bottommost creatures from the board and then place it onto your player board in the invited creatures area. You also gain the listed spirit to the right. And these icons will advance the top part of the relevant biome track by 1 space. This icon will allow you to take 1 visible ecosystem card from the top of the board and add it to an empty slot above your player board. This icon will allow you to give a gift to one of the 6 sages in the game. Place one of your cubes from your player board onto the number 1 spot, and if you already have a cube on that sage, then advance it 1 space to the right. This icon allows you to gain a number of rewards from a sage where you have a cube, and you will gain a number of rewards based on the number value of where your cube currently sits. And this icon allows you to place a villager onto a track straight from your reserve. These icons will gain or lose you spirit points. And finally, these icons allow you to train your small villagers and move them into your reserve to use them on a later turn. All icons are clearly listed in the rulebook and are very, very easy to follow, especially after you've played a few turns. Step 3 will allow you to complete an ecosystem card if you have one above your player board, but you will need to spend points from the biome reserve tracks. If you complete an ecosystem card, then you will get the benefits listed at the top of the card, and you will flip it over and you will add this to your ecosystem at the end of your turn. And finally, step 4. This is the final part of your turn where you will advance the biome reserve if appropriate, and then advance any tracks that you have villagers on. If you have generated any biomes but not spent them, you slide the bottom of the biome up to join the top, gaining the regeneration points, or victory points as I call them, that you pass over. Then you advance any tracks that you have villagers on. For each of your large villagers and small black villagers, the elder and young villagers, you advance the track 1 step. And for each small white villager, the veterans, you advance 2 steps. And don't forget that whenever a track moves with one of your villagers on it, you have the option to get off and place your villager at the start of a path. This then ends your turn, but during the next player's turn, you will add any cards to your ecosystem, as well as any creatures from your invited area. And if you are unable to place any creatures, then you must place them in the captivity area on your player board. And what follows now is how the ecosystem's cards work and how to place monsters. And as an example, this is the starting ecosystem card that I would have at the beginning of the game. And during play, if I was to complete this ecosystem card, gain its rewards, I would then flip it over and then I can add this to my ecosystem, and you can add it in a number of different ways. And the rules for adding cards to your ecosystem are that they must align like so. You may cover certain elements of the card and you can freely rotate the card in any way you wish. However, you cannot completely cover an ecosystem card, and also you cannot move a previously placed card. So I couldn't move this card, and I can't tuck cards underneath. So in this example, I placed my ecosystem card onto my starting card like this to create this area here. If I'd invited one of the creatures and had them on my player board, once I place this ecosystem card, I can place one or more of my invited creatures, and I may additionally place one creature from my captivity area. So on my turn, if I had invited this creature, then I can place him into my ecosystem. And the rules for placement is that they have to go onto an empty 4x4 grid. So I could put him there, I could put him there, there or there, but I could not, for example, place him here because he's not at an empty intersection of 4 habitats. If I picked up another creature and wanted to place this one, then they cannot go orthogonally adjacent. So I could not put the creature there. Instead, I'd have to put the creature here or here in this example. And as you build and extend your ecosystem, you will have more opportunities to place other creatures as you collect them during the game. And again, the rule book is extremely handy because it has the end game scoring here and a summary of the creatures. And indeed, we can see in this example here, for each mush frog, and that's what he is, a mush frog, he will score 3 points for each adjacent tree habitat. So he's got 1, 2, 3, 4, he would score 12 points. And each of these creatures work differently and like to be next to different habitats, or indeed like to be aligned and can see other creatures. And the rule book here gives you all these examples for you to see and plan where you want to put your creatures and also how you want to form your habitats. When the sun tracker reaches the end of the sun track, that will trigger the start of the game end. And the game will end after all players have had 2 further full turns. And then you will perform the end game scoring, which is covered rather handily on the back of the rulebook on the quick reference sheet. First, you will lose 3 spirit for each captive creature. And then you will score your spirit points. And depending where you are on the spirit track, this will either be a positive or negative point score. Then you will score the seasons track, and then you will score the creatures from your ecosystem. And for scoring the season tiles, each tile will show you a condition and the base RP points gained each time you meet the condition. So after you calculate your base RP for a season tile, you then multiply it by the RP multiplier that you have reached on this particular season track. And this provides you with the total score for this season. And you repeat that process for all 4 seasons. And then after all players have done their endgame scoring, the player with the most RP points win. And in the case of a tile, you use the following tiebreakers. In this order, the player with the most creatures on their ecosystem would win, or the player with the most spirit, or the player who has advanced more steps on the season tracks. And if still tied, well, everyone deserves to share the victory. And that's how you play Arborea. Well, my goodness, Aborea. What an interesting game. It's got a very unique feel about the game. A very unique worker placement mechanic where your workers are going on a pilgrimage by standing on these tracks that slide across into the board. And as they pass certain paths, you have the opportunity to jump off and then later in your turn walk through that path, activating all the icons that you see. And that is where the beauty in the game lies, because which track do you go on to? What are you trying to do in the game? Are you trying to increase certain biomes so that you'll be able to complete one of your ecosystem cards? But in the meantime, somebody else could use those biomes that you've generated yourself and use them to complete their own ecosystem cards. It's such a dilemma. This is such a fascinating puzzle of a game. It's almost like a worker placement engine builder where you're almost pushing your luck with your villagers as they move along the track. Do you want to push your luck and leave them a little bit longer so they get to activate more bonuses on their path? Or do they jump off earlier, not get so many bonuses, but you'll be able to get them back perhaps onto other tracks and again start moving them along these tracks to gain various other things? There is a lot going on in this game, but it's not as complicated as it seems. The iconography is very clear and everything is covered in the rulebook. And talking about the rulebook itself is very well laid out and clarifies any questions you may have. And like I said, the quick reference on the back is just brilliant. Once you played a few rounds, that's all you will really need is this. And you will quickly get used to what each of the icons do. It is really such a beautiful looking game. It's a very clever design. It's very thinky. The board is not as garish as it may first appear when you first open it up. You think, my goodness, where are my sunglasses? Once you get used to it, it's actually very well laid out and very good indeed. We have had quite a few games of this and we really have enjoyed them all. The first game, I must admit at the start, it was a bit of a, what am I doing and why am I doing it? But as soon as you played a few rounds and you realise the ebb and flow of the game and the need to get the biomes increased so that you can get your ecosystem cards out there and then get your monsters out and onto your ecosystem to then score you points at the end of the game. There's quite a few different little ways to score points and all of it comes together in such a beautiful package. This really is a terrific game. I wish I had played it before I did my top 10 games beginning with A. For I think this would have made the list. I've looked at the Kickstarter edition of the game and they do come with these wonderful little trays that you can build and hold all the components in there together. These are very handy. If you can get hold of the Kickstarter or deluxe version of the game, then it's well worth it for these trays because it does make setup and teardown very simple and very quick. And all of the components are top notch and very good. I have to say, I am very impressed with this game and it's one that I think is going to hit the table quite a few times, and there's a ton of extra content in the Kickstarter version as well. I'm not sure if I've mentioned this already, but there's a Midnight River expansion that has some boats, a Winds of Change expansion, There's some sage overlay tiles, and there is a solo mode for the game as well. So there's plenty of content to keep you going with this game. And it's quite simply a puzzly joy to play. And so I have no hesitation at all in giving this a 2 Fun with Boxes thumbs up for Aborea from Alley Cat Games. Highly recommended. Well, I do hope you've enjoyed taking a look at Aborea with me. If you did, please click the old like button and also hit that subscribe button too. That would be super good for the channel and really help to make it grow. And in the meantime, as always, please do take care and bye for now.